Only death can pay for life.
Valar Morghulis. All men must die. This is a phrase that defines the creed of the Faceless Men, even though it comes from the language of their historical oppressors. Born in the volcanic hellscape that was Valyria's slave mines, the Faceless Men's journey from expendable laborers to elite assassins showcases what happens when you push a group of people too far into the abyss. Today, they're silent sculptors of Planetos geopolitics which relentlessly pursue achieving balance through death. In this video, we'll be tracing their origins, ideological evolution, and impact on major historical events, including a few current ones. So, without further ado, this is the origins of the Faceless Men, explained. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves though, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The Valyrian Crucible. How to unintentionally create a death cult. The Faceless Men emerged in the volcanic mines beneath the 14 flames of the Valyrian Peninsula. That's a sentence that needs a lot of unpacking because there are at least 5 subplots that come out of it. That's George R.R. Martin for you. Even analysis videos about his writing have plots within plots. But the reason we need to explain this is simple. Context is everything. Every group of people in this world, whether it's racial, cultural, organizational, or plain old relational, has a reason for behaving the way they behave and thinking the way that they think. Beliefs aren't formed through mere philosophy. Collective experience is a much stronger and faster teacher. And the fact of the matter is, the Faceless Men were born from their collective belief in the only certainty of life: death. The 14 Flames was a chain of volcanoes where Valyrian dragon lords worked countless slaves to death extracting gold, gemstones, and other precious resources and materials. These mines were not merely workplaces but laboratories of suffering, where extreme heat, toxic fumes, and the constant threat of volcanic eruptions, fireworms, and dragons terrorized all who entered. The Valyrians weren't slave owners originally, at least according to history. It's said that they picked up slavery from their Giscari enemies, and with the fall of ancient Gis after the 5th Giscari War, the Valyrians took to slavery with scary aplomb. Slaves were hauled into the Valyrian Peninsula from conquered territories, be they Giscari, Andalusi, or Rhoynar, and used not as labor, but as a resource. All Valyrian magic was rooted in 2 things: blood and fire. The Valyrians didn't use slaves in their mines alone. Slaves were farmed for all sorts of infernal blood magic rituals, most disturbing of which were the half-human breeding programs. In a way, the mine slaves had it better because at least they weren't being forcibly bred with animals, but that's not true now, is it? What could be worse than living in conditions where you will slowly cook to death, as so many Valyrian slaves did? What's worse than knowing a fireworm or a dragon can descend on you at any moment and end your life before you even know it? Feed and forced labor. These were the 2 F's that defined the lives of Valyrian slaves unfortunate enough to be sent to the mines, but the Valyrians did give them 1 femtosecond's worth of relief. Under the guise of a freehold, they forewent adopting an official state religion and allowed their subjects to believe in their own gods, even the slaves. They brought with them fragmented beliefs from a million different gods, and what unified them was a single truth: death can never be escaped, and death is present in all religions. Whether it's the Black Goat of Quhar, or the Stranger of the Faith of the Seven, or the Lion of Night from Yi Ti and the Great Empire of the Dawn, life and other aspects of life take many forms, but death remains uniform. Over generations, these disparate traditions and their precursors coalesced into a radical theological insight in the mind of one nameless, faceless man. All death gods were facets of a single many-faced god whose sole constant was the inevitability of mortality. And death wasn't the worst thing in this world because he personally knew that there were worse things than death in it. This faceless man developed the first rituals of the order in this infernal environment. Desperate slaves whispered prayers for release each day in the 14 flames. Release from spells, release from heat, release from life itself. But the first faceless man didn't bestow the gift of the many-faced god on just anyone. He found the most wretched of all the slaves, the one who'd suffered the most in the mines, and gave him the mercy he begged for. This practice evolved into the death ceremony we see in the main series, where the most suffering individuals, those who prayed with a genuine despair for deliverance, receive it through assassination. The Faceless Men have a pool in the middle of their temple compound called the House of Black and White. This pool of black water is actually poisoned, and they give this poison to those who come to their halls seeking the eternal sleep. After drinking deeply from a cup of the pool's water, they retreat into alcoves with hard stone beds where they lay down and wait to die. It's left ambiguous whether these people know that they're being poisoned. Everything about the Faceless Men is ambiguous, but it's implied that they know at some level what they're asking for, and that they see the House of Black and White as a worthy place to put themselves to rest. This method of deliverance was perfected over the centuries that saw the Faceless Men become one of the 3 pillars of Braavos, but before we get into their current strength, we must explore how they got to Braavos. That first Faceless Man didn't remain alone in his crusade to bring death to the deserving for too long. After giving the gift to that wretched slave we mentioned earlier, he came across another in the mines. But this slave didn't pray for his own death, he prayed for the death of the slave owner who put him in the mines, and the first Faceless Man accepted his assassination contract on the condition that he join him. This is how the Order of the Faceless Men was created from the mongrel bastards that dwelt within the 14 Flames. The first Faceless Man thought of himself as the instrument of the many-faced god, and had adopted several techniques from adherents of different religious groups to create his own. These 2 Faceless Men escaped the Freehold's capital at some point, most likely during the slave rebellion that led to the founding of Braavos, but we'll get to that in a few. To close out this section of the video, we need to explain how the formation of the Faceless Men became one of the most significant events in world history, and it's mostly about the Doom of Valyria. The Doom occurred 114 years before Aegon Targaryen was officially crowned as the High King of all Westeros. It's an event that is considered inexplicable because the 14 Flames had been a relatively stable chain of volcanoes up until the Doom. There were no reports of Pompeii-esque doomsday scenarios emerging from the Valyrian Peninsula before the Doom, which is unusual when you consider the amount of volcanic activity that was going on over there. While some maesters of the Citadel believed that the 14 Flames erupted in response to the arrogance of the Valyrians, who meddled with the natural order to grow fat and rich off of blood magic and sacrifice, other scholars attribute the Doom partly to Faceless Men systematically assassinating fire mages who maintained volcanic containment spells. It's believed that by eliminating these mages, the cult triggered the cataclysm that destroyed Valyria, marking history's first documented case of geological warfare being engineered by human hands. There are several theories pertaining to this belief in the Ice and Fire community, with the most prevalent one being that the Faceless Men were paid by Aenar Targaryen to pull off the Doom, but we remain skeptical, mostly because no one in Braavos wants anything to do with dragons, and Aenar might have separated himself from the Valyrians, but he was still a dragon lord. It's more likely that the Faceless Men assassinated the Valyrian sorcerers and many of their higher-ups, as the kindly man suggested to Arya in A Feast for Crows, to satisfy their order's vengeance against their oppressors. Because the order took root in a city that abhors slavery in all its forms, and that's where we shift our focus now. From fugitives to power brokers, how the Faceless Men shaped Braavos. Many centuries before the Doom, a slave ship from the Valyrian Peninsula bound for Sothorios was met with a terrible accident. Well, an accident for the slavers, and a miracle for the slaves on board because they somehow managed to overcome several Valyrian soldiers escorting them to Sothorios, which must have included at least a couple of sorcerers as well. It's well known that any person the Valyrians sent to Sothorios never returned, because Sothorios was home to Valyria's worst penal colony, the city of Gogosos, where that half-human breeding program we mentioned earlier had its biggest labs and flesh pits. After managing to get rid of their enslavers, those slaves turned the ship north instead of south on the advice of a group of moonsingers from the lands of the Jogos Nahai. The fact that Valyrians had slaves from either side of the bones tells you how far their reach truly extended, and also how many enemies they truly made. These moonsingers sang of a land protected by mountains on all sides and hidden by a thick fog, a land where the escapees could survive undisturbed for millennia, and thus was Braavos born. The city of 100 islands and 1,000 gods, perched upon a lagoon that would shield them for eternity, Braavos took form from the mixed faiths of each slave who escaped the grasp of the Valyrians. That's why today, you'll find temples dedicated to several gods on Braavos' Isle of the Gods, because in this city, they know just how long and how hard men had to pray to achieve freedom. Upon its inception, Braavos was nothing more than a fledgling refuge for escaped slaves. For 100 years, no one even knew the place existed, and even after the supposed unmasking of Braavos, the secret city remained a secret for 2 more centuries. Once its existence became widely known, Braavos was recognized as the only true safe haven for any person who had gone through the experience of slavery or wished to avoid it, because the first law of Braavos is that slavery, thraldom, and all other forms of human subjugation were outlawed. It was there that the Faceless Men established the House of Black and White, a temple doubling as their headquarters. And if you ask us, the Faceless Men are the reason many of Braavos' current institutions exist. Publicly, they serve as funerary priests, overseeing last rites and administering euthanasia to the terminally ill. But privately, they hone their signature craft, assassination disguised as divine will. To sustain this dual identity, economic camouflage is required, and that's where the Iron Bank and Sea Lords of Braavos come into the picture. It's likely that the Faceless Men had a huge role in establishing Braavos' anti-slavery ethos, seeing as the first Faceless Man was a slave. What we imagine happened on that ship bound for Sothorios is that the first Faceless Man's disciples caught wind of it and decided it was the perfect opportunity to gain a legitimate foothold for their operations. Slaves being transported to a penal colony would be malnourished, chained, and otherwise secured for transport, but a Faceless Man would be capable of taking out the ship's guards and maybe even the sorcerers with lethal efficiency. When the former slaves finally arrived at the fog-covered lagoon that turns into their future home, they're told to keep it a secret while the Faceless Men set up their power base, which would realistically take at least a century's worth of work. We're told that the Iron Bank of Braavos has its foundations in the hidden wealth of the slaves who founded Braavos. They allegedly hid their stolen wealth within the iron mines dotting the 100 Isles of Braavos, and as this wealth grew, they decided to become moneylenders. But that's an awfully dubious way to describe the inception of an enterprise so powerful it now dictates global geopolitics. It's said that debtors who defaulted on loans taken from the Iron Bank often met mysterious ends. The phrase most commonly associated with their debt collection department is, when princes default on loans taken from the Iron Bank, new princes spring up from nowhere. This is a statement that, at first glance, seems to confirm the rumor that the Iron Bank funds their debtors' enemies to recoup their losses. Indeed, that phrase is spoken around the time Stannis Baratheon inks a deal with Tycho Nestoris to claim the Iron Throne. But that isn't all that's implied by that statement. A new prince can be one living in exile, or another who lives within the same halls as the debtor, except they're more malleable and compliant than them. The threat of assassination is ever present when it comes to the Iron Bank, and we think a major reason for that is the fact that their genesis lies not in wealth hidden in iron mines, but the wealth generated from Faceless Men assassinations. We're told several times throughout A Song of Ice and Fire that the bigger a target is, the higher the Faceless Men's price for assassination becomes. Littlefinger says in the first novel that they demand a fee that can raise a small mercenary army if used otherwise, and that's for taking out a merchant. For killing a prince, the Faceless Men might just ask for wealth that can be used to raise and arm a proper army, which feels like a much more realistic basis for creating the Iron Bank's obscene wealth than the money of a bunch of slaves. This is because, in all of its descriptions, Braavos is described as a city rich in natural defenses but poor in natural resources. Firewood is one of their biggest imports, and the Braavosi need to constantly boil the waters of the lagoon they call their home because Braavos lies in brackish lands. Ask yourself this: how in the world did escaped slaves who refused to reveal their survival for centuries get enough resources to create the world's most influential bank? It seems unlikely they'd do it through mere trade and an unusual amount of savings, right? To us, it's much more likely that the Faceless Men made the Braavosi stay hidden while they got to work on building their death economy. 3 centuries is more than enough time for them to have carried out enough assassinations to acquire an obscene amount of wealth. And besides, when a Faceless Man comes for you, you might as well kill yourself, because the true cause of your death won't be known to anyone else. The Faceless Men are trained to be so efficient in the art of killing that they can reach and kill a target anywhere in the world, without leaving a single trace of their presence. To us, it feels far more realistic that they were the ones who laid down the foundations for Braavosi society, with the Iron Bank and the Sea Lord taking over duties they couldn't personally oversee in that order. The Iron Bank became their financial institution, while the Sea Lord's ships became their naval arm. This is probably why that Braavosi man gave Arya Stark an entire cabin upon receiving a Faceless Man coin, because he knew he was performing a service for the oldest institution from his homeland. Of course, he snuck Arya into Braavos instead of announcing her presence in the city, because in the current timeline, the Sea Lord and the Iron Bank want to distance themselves from this guild of assassins. And that might have been true for back in the day as well, only then it was more out of choice than to save face. This is because central to the Faceless Men's identity is the face skinning ritual, a gruesome process that's most likely rooted in Valyrian blood magic. After preserving the skin of corpses brought to or created within the temple, acolytes cut their faces off to be used as assets later on. These faces are applied on those marked to become Faceless Men through a ritual that merges the wearer's face with the skin mask, enabling perfect physical mimicry. This practice serves dual purposes: operational utility for assassinations and psychological indoctrination. By adopting the visages of the dead, the Faceless Men ritualize the erasure of self, embodying their creed of becoming no one. And when Arya Stark's face is cut open and she is given another to wear, she can even experience the memories of the deceased person. The Faceless Men also use other magical tricks like glamours to hide their true appearance, because deception is the foundation of assassination. A faceless man needs to know how to stalk their target from a distance, how to become a blade in a crowd, how to befriend a target only to kill them later on to be truly effective as a faceless man. The removal of one's personal identity is a test to see whether a prospect can truly embrace serving the many-faced god, or if they're lying to themselves and their trainers. But in perfecting such weapons, the Faceless Men also employ methods used by their oppressors. Glamours, in particular, are associated with Valyrian sorcery thanks to Bloodraven, who was known to wear them rather commonly during his time as the Iron Fist of the Targaryen dynasty. As Tycho Nestoris tells Jon Snow in A Dance with Dragons, "We Braavosi are descended from those who fled Valyria and the wrath of its dragon lords. We do not jape of dragons." And while this represents the collective sentiments of all Braavosi natives, it appears as though this distinction doesn't apply to the Faceless Men's operational methods. They have used fire and blood magic to perfect the art of killing over the centuries. And if it's true that they collaborated with the Targaryens to facilitate the Doom, then they have mingled with dragons as well. This knowledge would expose Braavos' hypocrisy with regards to their former oppressors, because on one hand they reject them, but on the other they use all of their skills. So disavowing the Faceless Men must be a public policy instituted to protect Braavosi secrets. And if that doesn't sound like something a death cult of assassins would do to keep themselves safe, we don't know what does. We're telling you all of this to give you an idea of the actual scope of their involvement in Braavosi politics. The Faceless Men are perceived as being an independent organization, but in truth, they permeate Braavosi society, and their origin extends to the formation of Braavos itself. The hatred for dragons, the anti-slavery stance, the heavy focus on naval and mercantile endeavors instead of conquering everything under the sun, all of it aligns with the Faceless Man's ethos. And even the territory that Braavos has conquered over the years and the politics they've warred with follows this ethos. Braavos had 6 wars with Pentos, all of them over territorial and ideological disputes. Of these 6 wars, Braavos won 4 and the Pentoshi won 2, but just barely. In fact, their second and most recent victory was so unprecedented that they signed a peace agreement with Braavos where they cede land to them and agree to ban slavery. Pentos doesn't really enforce this ban, but they maintain the appearance of enforcement because they know that Braavos simply outclasses them in all aspects of warfare. The Braavosi call themselves traders and merchants, not warriors, but they have a healthy population of rapier-wielding swashbucklers who stalk their streets every single day. The point here is that everything Braavos says about itself is a lie, designed to gain the trust of the outside world to facilitate access to such corners that would have eluded them had they tried to expand aggressively. And this is one of the biggest achievements of the Faceless Men. They've helped Braavos cultivate an unbeatable reputation with their services, some of which we get to see in the main series. Historical interventions. Assassinations attributed to the Faceless Men. The mysterious death of King Balon Greyjoy exemplifies the Faceless Men's lethal tactics. Balon's death was orchestrated by his evil brother, Euron Greyjoy. We got a prophetic warning about this in A Storm of Swords, where the ghost of Highheart told the Brotherhood without banners that she saw a man without a face waiting on a bridge that swayed and swung. Upon his shoulders perched a drowned crow, seaweed dripping from the feathers, and the implication was that the man without the face killed the Golden Kraken of Greyjoy. When Euron shows up in the main series proper, he tells a story about a dragon egg he found during his travels that he then dropped into the sea, apparently out of boredom. But he later admits to Aeron Damphair that his hand was the one that pushed Balon off that bridge, though he didn't do the deed himself. It has been reported and commonly believed among the fandom that he paid for the hit with a dragon egg, hinting at the cult's interest in acquiring magical resources beyond mere coin. A dragon's egg has a value similar to an army. It's an extremely rare artifact that would suffice as payment payment for the murder of a king, but dragons are also fire-made flesh, and this was probably the first time that the Faceless Men acquired a dragon's egg of their own. With Jack and Hagar posing as Pigboy Pate in the Citadel, which is the only place that holds a full copy of a book titled Death of Dragons, you start to realize that the Faceless Men have an agenda of their own beyond killing for the many-faced god, which they profess to be their sole reason for existing. This transaction also illustrates their role in destabilizing power structures. By removing Balon, they facilitated Euron's rise, a chaotic figure whose actions in the Winds of Winter may help further their anti-dragon agenda. Historically, they've associated with several inexplicable deaths, of which there are 4 of particular note. These deaths belong to Prince Harlan Hoar, son of King Corwin Hoar, the last Hoar king before their house's expansion into the mainland, the disgraceful Septon Moon, who rose up in rebellion during the reign of Maegor the Cruel, and the Rogar brothers Lysandro and Drazenko, whose bank threatened to eclipse the service of the Iron Bank of Braavos. Harlan Hoar's death is as curious as it is suspicious. He was King Corwin's second son and the first in line to the throne of the Isles, seeing as his elder brother had perished to grayscale in their youth. Harlan's death occurred 6 days before King Corwin passed away due to illness, and he was said to have died falling off of a horse. Both of these deaths facilitated the rise of King Harwin Hardhand, who took his father's resources and ships, ridiculed his policy of putting trade first, and invaded and conquered the Riverlands from the Durandons. Because of this, many suspect Harwin of having hired Faceless Men to kill his brother and possibly even his father, which we can sort of see happening. Corwin Hoar's policies had earned his family the coin they'd needed to fund such an undertaking, and both Corwin and Harlan would have been obstacles to Harwin's ambition. The Ironborn deplore kinslaying as one of the highest sins in the land, and even Euron didn't kill Balon himself, though he did kill a couple of his older brothers, for which he is hated by Aeron Damphair. Septon Moon is a less dubious case. Moon was a Septon who was worshipped despite the fact that he drank like a fish and slept with women like he was Garth the Green. He was actually the last and largest holdout of the faith militant movement, setting up camp outside of Old Town as he waited to negotiate with King Jaehaerys the Conciliator. Nobody wanted to make an overt move against Moon because his popularity would have made taking any action against him backfire. So clearly, someone sent in a female assassin to do the job. Moon's death occurred at the hands of a woman who brought a flagon of poisoned wine to his dwellings, but it wasn't the wine that killed him. Apparently, the woman and Moon got into a physical struggle which saw her slash his windpipe open. She ran away from his tent and was never found again, and witnesses had trouble recalling what her face actually looked like. The fact that she was already planning to poison Moon, coupled with her disappearance and the fact that no one could remember her face, makes this feel a lot like a Faceless Man attack. There are disagreements, of course, because most people tend to believe Faceless Men can phase through walls like ghosts, but if Moon, who was a heavy drinker, realized his wine was spiked, he would have attacked whoever entered his tent and gave it to him, and at that point, self-defense would take precedence over elegance. The final 2 deaths, those of Lysandro and Drazenko Rogaire, are almost unanimously attributed to the Faceless Men for reasons that should be evident to you guys by now. The Rogaire Bank had grown rich enough to rival the Iron Bank. If they were allowed to continue to flourish, Braavos would have lost its most significant political asset. The fact that the 2 brothers died in 2 separate locations divided by a sea within 1 day of each other is our second piece of evidence of the Faceless Men's involvement, because only they would have been powerful enough to pull off such a feat. The person who financed these assassinations was likely Lord Unwin Peake, the man who tried to turn his 3-castle sigil into a royal one in the aftermath of the dance. But the fact still remains. These 4 seemingly unrelated killings that occurred centuries apart from one another have one unifying factor: inexplicable means. And that's why we're sure the Faceless Men were involved in at least 3 of them. Harlan's death could have been orchestrated by Harwin using one of the Ironborn as the assassin, but Septon Moon and the Rogaire brothers' deaths are all suspicious and suggestive of the Faceless Men's intervention. These killings exemplify the inverted liberation theology of the Faceless Men. Born from slave resistance, they ironically adopted hierarchical structures mirroring Valyrian oppression, with acolytes subsuming their identities to a collective will. The Freehold's 40 families constantly fought amongst each other, but to the rest of the world, they weren't Targaryens or Belarises, they were simply Valyrians. The Faceless Men's face-changing rites serve as a ritualized trauma reenactment, forcing wearers to assume the identities of various deceased people while hollowing out those identities' power. Economically, their asymmetric class warfare balances moral and practical aims. By charging nobles exorbitant fees, they redistribute wealth to fund assassinations of slavers and tyrants, a self-perpetuating cycle of justice and profit. This duality reflects Braavos' own contradictions: a free city built by escaped slaves, yet reliant on mercantile exploitation. The many-faced god itself anthropomorphizes historical trauma. He's a deity born from collective suffering, yet universalized beyond ethnic or cultural boundaries. Unlike the drowned god's ironborn exclusivity or the Lord of Light's proselytizing fervor, the many-faced god accepts all who suffer, making it uniquely adaptable across continents. From Valyria's ashes to Braavos' shadowy canals, the Faceless Men have shaped the millennia of history through calculated killing. Their upcoming role in the Winds of Winter will likely hinge on weaponized knowledge, whether via the dragon-slaying poisons, Citadel secrets, or Arya's unfinished training. As both products and avengers of Valyrian cruelty, they remain a testament to institutionalized trauma's transformative power. In a world teetering on magical resurgence and political collapse, their cold calculus ensures the many-faced god's creed endures. All men must die, but some deaths serve the balance between the living and the dead, and thus all men must serve. Marvelous verdict! And that's it for this one. If you guys want a video where we discuss the House of Black and White and the organizational hierarchy of the Faceless Men, let us know in the comments down below, along with your thoughts on this video. Like and share it with your fellow Martinians, and subscribe to Marvelous Videos for more in-depth Ice and Fire content like this. We'll see you guys in the next one, so stay safe and don't let people whose faces seem to shift with the moonlight enter your tent tonight, for they will emerge unscathed, you not at all.
And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, be safe out there, and thanks for watching.